Hey, this is Sarah Huff from Reattached, and today I am telling you a little bit about commissions for sellers agents and for buyers agents. So one important thing to note in a real estate transaction is that the seller pays the real estate commission. Of course, there are other situations. Real estate commissions are always negotiable, and there can be sort of odd situations that will pop up where a buyer will pay part, or even in a very rare case, all of a real estate agent's commission for facilitating a sale. That would be a very unusual situation where, for example, a buyer comes to a buyer's agent or a real estate agent or broker and says, hey, that's my dream house, I want to go buy it. Can you do the legwork, find the seller, do everything, and just get them to sell me their house? And in that case, you would approach the seller and try to get them to pay your commission, but if they weren't game for that, then the buyer might be willing to pay their own real estate agent's commission just to make the deal happen and have assistance in facilitating that transaction. But that is a side tangent. In under normal cases, a buyer's agent will pay no fee to a real estate agent for their assistance in helping them buy a home, which is great and useful because in general it is more expensive for a buyer to buy a home than it is for a seller to sell a home. They have other fees like title insurance and all of the sundry recording fees. They have to pay their attorney, same as the seller, of course, but in general there are generally more fees that get nickel and dimed off of them from the bank and title and everything else like that on their way to closing than a seller will have, because they already did that before. So a seller, on the other hand, will pay their real estate agent to represent them in a transaction. Every market is different. I have people come in from other markets and they say, oh my gosh, you make so much in commission. And I have other people come in and say, oh my gosh, I cannot believe, that the commission is so low. It is always negotiable, but there tends to be a kind of leveling of what agents are getting in for commission in a market that fluctuates a little bit, but in general, just because one agent is sellers are going around shopping for an agent, and in general will then process and see what different fees are being assessed. And so agents tend to, in general, not in any like price fixing kind of way, but the amount of commission that's charged tends to float, let's say. For different sellers. In our brokerage, we are typically assessing 6% of the sales price as commission, and that includes a full suite of services that we offer our seller clients, including consultation about pricing, selling the home, how to set it up, what you need to do to get the highest price, all of our background information, an assessment of the value based on sales comparables, photos, marketing, access to our network of buyers, and also sometimes it goes without saying, access to our network of agents who know us and like us and know that we're honest and like to bring buyers to us to sell a home because they know the transaction will be kind of a clear process that is easy to manage and reliable, which is sort of like what we like to do and offer to people. It also includes transaction management and access to our office staff for scheduling showings and working with attorneys and lending from both sides if you have to pay off your mortgage or if the buyer has to get a new mortgage. Coordination of all those moving parts from start to finish. So from kind of like the beginning of our meeting all the way to the end when you get cut your closing check, and a little coordination afterwards, of course, getting the buyers set up with everything that they need to enjoy, the new home or rental property or whatever that is. We're never trying to leave anybody out to dry after a closing happens, put it that way. So that is typically what we are doing in the market. It's interesting to note how commissions change over time and how the market sort of dictates what a seller is willing to pay and also what a selling agent is willing to offer as a split to a buyer's agent. Okay, so what's that? So let's say a seller's agent has a total of 6% of their commission that's going to get paid to them by the seller. Now, they won't necessarily get all of that commission if they are working with a buyer's agent. A certain percentage of that, 6%, will be offered as compensation for a buyer's agent bringing an awesome client who's going to buy the house. In this market, it's typically 2% of the 6% commission. It used to be a little bit higher, but I guess the market has gotten to be more brutal over time. I haven't seen anything more than 2% in many years, and when I started, you'd see a 2.5% now and then. But I think agents working in this market have gotten very realistic about how much work it takes to sell some of these unusual buildings. And also the peculiarities of the City of Newburgh municipality, just with, how to bob and weave through some of the municipal paperwork hurdles and things like that. And that's certainly how I think about that, because we handle a lot of this and that issues that pop up along the way in a pretty comprehensive way. And we don't expect a buyer's agent to have access to all of that information, contacts, and know-how of how to resolve those problems in the same way that we would. And so the commission split is a little bit lopsided in that way, just because of the weirdo buildings that we are selling in the City of Newburgh, I guess, is the way to put it. So that is the commission split between the buyer's agent and the seller's agent, which is not usually relevant for a buyer or it's not usually relevant for the buyer to understand that. The seller will obviously understand that that's going to be what's happening when he enters into a listing agreement with his seller's agent. Hopefully us. Whenever I talk with people about this who are not so familiar with real estate transactions, there's always the question of doesn't the seller's agent just try to always bring their own buyer because they make more money? Sometimes, yes, and it is a very nasty thing, and I don't like it, and it's something that you can't always put your finger on it, but you do know it when you see it in an agent who has a track record of being kind of not super accessible to other agents, and the properties are hard to show, and then they're always posting, both sides of the transaction. So it's something that one should be aware of, and in most cases, agents who are doing this or leaning in that direction, we know, and we have really good relationships with them, and we're always, fun and easy to work with, so that door can stay open for collaborating on deals. And we are just so organized and create such a great paper trail that it would be very difficult for them to say no. So there are skilled ways to work around that proclivity that occasionally pops up in sellers agents. But in general, I think anyone who is doing this job for any length of time begins to understand sooner or later, sooner if they are going to have longevity, and later if they are going to burn themselves out from not making any money, that they begin to understand that the relationships that you have with other agents and your reputation in a market are just the most important thing. You have to be able to function. You have to be able to be a person who is not a pushover and who is not giving other people what they want, but who is a person who you can communicate with, who is straightforward, who is as available as absolutely possible while also maintaining, enough of a personal life to not have like a burnout meltdown. There's always that balance, but in general, relationship with other agents are very important, and good agents who work in this industry, I think for a long time, and there are certainly a lot of agents who have been at this game way longer than I have, and I am not trying to, they're like career real estate agents who've been doing it I just did a deal with an agent who's been an agent for 50 some years. I mean, he's amazing, his whole life. He cannot be shaken by anything. The deal took almost 3 years to close. He's just going along, seen it all before, but so I'm not making pretense that I have, this like kind of astronomical longevity, but I have been doing this job for a while, and I I do see that those networks and the relationship between other agents is very important while also serving our clients. And great agents know that it's nothing personal when a deal doesn't work out or when terms need to be negotiated in a more aggressive way, because it can be coordinated in a way that is respectful and creates wins for both sides. So that is a little bit of my information that I can share about buyers and sellers agents splits and commissions and how that works, and a little bit of extra information on my perspective on how that is all working that I hope is enlightening and I hope is interesting for you. P.S. There is also a little side note in here that is a question that people ask me sometimes, which is, should I work with a buyer's agent at all, or should I just go to a seller's agent directly if there is a house that I like and I see the listing? It's a really good question, and it really depends on you and your comfort level. So when I am selling a house, I have a fiduciary duty, so a legal duty to my seller in certain ways, to protect their information, to work in their interest, to maximize, not necessarily always the sale price, but to maximize the elements of the sale that are most important to that seller. If someone comes directly to me, for example, and they're like, hey Sarah, I love this house at 123 Broadway. That's probably a real address, but it's just an example here. I will say, that's amazing, great, love it, I can definitely help you. Just so you know, I represent the interests of the seller in this transaction, and if that makes you uncomfortable anywhere along the line, I can assign you to a different agent for negotiations. That being said, I have a legal obligation to share with you any material defects that I know of about the property, that I know of at the property. So basically that means if there's a hole in the roof, or if the structure is unsound, or if there's anything that the seller has shared with me is a problem with this building, I have to tell you. Now, do I have to tell you that the seller is going through an awful divorce and he has to sell the house over the next 2 weeks? No, I won't tell you that. That being said, I always speak with my sellers before about the amount of information that they are comfortable sharing, and a lot of the time there are useful details about the seller's position that can just help everybody understand what are the best terms that a buyer can put forward. What are the seller's priorities, basically? And so in general, I explain and I get the seller's permission to share information about things like, why are they selling? Oh, you're moving. So is it important for a buyer to have a short closing timeline? Or is it important for a buyer to have super solid financing that we know is going to work out so the seller can move their stuff, get moving on to where they're going, and not have to worry about a shaky closing? Things like that often offer particular insight that can help a buyer. And when I am the seller's agent but also working with a buyer who's representing themselves, it can be not necessarily super advantageous, but nice to just not have to play a game of telephone through another agent to share that information. Obviously, working with a buyer's agent is also great, and I have no problem. And in general, I like other real estate agents because I understand their position, and it's people who have chosen to work in the same profession, who typically like buildings and like people and are cool, interesting, personable folks to talk to. So it's another good option, and it's totally fine if you feel like you really want to have someone who has your back and is representing you, even if they might have a little bit less access to information, or it puts you in more of a position of a game of telephone with the seller's agent. But that being said, the buyer's agent can also troop you around to a lot of different buildings. It's also the case if you approach a seller's agent at a particular building and that building doesn't work out, most of the time a seller's agent is willing to work with qualified buyers and take them around to other buildings, or at least assign that potential buyer to someone great who's working with their team. So it's another little question that I get asked now and then, just who represents who and how does this work with buyers and sellers agents. If you are super interested in that topic, let me know in the comments, and I will do another video about agency disclosure, which is basically just who represents who in a transaction. Another thing to note about the percentage that a seller is paying their agent. Oftentimes when the market is hot, and there's a lot of agents flooding into the market, thinking that real estate is an easy profession to be in, you poor creatures, there will be these sort of young and hungry agents who come in and, bless their hearts, they undercut themselves on commission in an attempt to get seller clients. So from a seller's point of view, if it's a seller who has more experience or feels confident that they can manage a transaction, it can be a great way to get a cheaper rate on an agent. I am always sort of worried about sellers who are making that decision, and this is not me trying to pump people for more commission or higher commission. It's just something to be aware of, that particularly when the market is very hot and it's a seller's market, there can be a phenomenon of agents coming in with very low commission rates, willing to work for very little. And I think in that context, it is just the same as any other profession, right? So with experience comes an increase in compensation. So just like an entry-level employee at a company who is working to learn, these agents are embodying the same phenomenon where a lack of experience equates to a lower rate of compensation. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Different businesses, right? Every seller who is selling a building is a business, right? It's an entity. It has a legal structure. If it's an investment property in particular, all of that is probably formalized. But at any rate, every seller is hiring a human being to represent the interests of them as a business. So you can hire a super experienced, more expensive employee, agent kind of person, or you can hire a less expensive agent, employee kind of person. And it's simply, I'm not trying to suggest that one or the other is better. I am just bringing attention to the fact that that is a phenomenon that exists in this profession and also other professions. That's just something to keep in mind and to be aware of when you are shopping for an agent. I hope it's helpful. Bye-bye.